And this leads really nicely into the next couple of projects, which are dealing with the questions of ecological governance and biopolitics and the interrelations between them as the central topic. So let me then just introduce these. The question then, so this group was the group we're working on, the positive biopolitics and ecological enforcement, which might also be a kind of ecological entanglement, takes us at starting point a notion that the future of planetary governance not only includes a kind of positive biopolitics and modes of ecological governance at a planetary scale, but may in fact just simply be constituted by that from the beginning. And as a number of people have raised, we get maybe a glimpse of that from the lessons of the pandemic. Responses that were based on equitable, well-structured data platforms were able to sense relevant information, bring it to the fore, communicate it in a credible, consistent way. We're able to get greater social buy-in for what would later become much more ambitious and focused forms of social intervention. Those that were not were left with the worst combination of draconian and anarchic improvisations. Populism crashed, or so it would seem. So whether justified by an idea that free-floating finance is all that is necessary to steer a society, or that bottom-up elective communities and networks of self-organization can immediately do everything that states once did, but without the insults of hierarchy, the notion that complex systems, such as human societies, understood inside of their ecological context, can do without some kind of top-down steerage, finds its limit. So these researchers investigated this approach from a couple different perspectives, one in having to do with the principle of ecological non-locality. And by this, I mean that the challenge of ecological governance runs directly through the obvious mismatch between local jurisdiction and the ubiquity of, for example, atmospheric carbon dioxide. And where planetary scale planning and governance should reside, again, we have a screeching void. So if the future of planetary governance is to a greater or lesser degree determined by capacity for mobilization and enforcement, then the relation between geotechnologies and geopolitics shifts accordingly. The former, as said, may determine the latter more than the inverse. Long-term secular energy futures, decarbonization, carbon capture, the rationalization of planetary metabolisms, the reformulation of the legal status of waste, the governance of molecularity more than the mediation of majority voice, all attest to a climate realism more than an environmental medievalism. They attest to a world not just rebellion against extinction, but the active prevention of it, as well as the projection and curation of viable planetarity. As one of the groups will be showing, the question then has everything to do, focusing on the Arctic, about the intertanglement of one place with another, that the placefulness of the Arctic is deeply interlinked with the placefulness of other locations. And so that the condition of that interdependence and that intermingling becomes, in essence, the ground zero, not only for framing the problem, but of mobilizing the intervention, the composition and response. The other group, positive biopolitics, is one based on an attempt to, in essence, de-dichotomize the aesthetic dichotomy that prevails between technological versus social responses. The best responses in the pandemic, for example, were based on both. And as we've said in our presentations a number of times, the capacity for society to sense and model and act back upon itself and care for its populations is the preeminent task of what we mean by governance. In the longer term, this includes prevention, cultivation, diversification of planetary life, both as it is and as it could be. Evolutionary systems and synthetic biology are conjoined as compositional frameworks. They entail the agency of quantitative and qualitative models, but also a kind of archival purpose for big data, quote unquote, things like seed vaults, ice cores, genomes, and so forth. These, in turn, rely on the embrace, not just the renunciation of a technologically mediated general sapience, both biological and technological, and a coherency of care for the astronomically rare life forms that we are and in which we are embedded. There's a process by which life makes life, matter makes matter, knowing itself. It's one in which we might see what we call biotech, not only as an object of governance, but another medium of governance itself and its own capacities for agency and compositionality.